order to achieve its goal and to broaden its scope of study, Universiti Sains Islam Malaysia USIM has established the Faculty of Economics and Muamalat in 2001, which began its first intake of students for a new program, this Bachelor Degree of Muamalat Administration with Honours in May 2002. The faculty serves as another platform to produce graduates who are knowledgeable, skilled and professional in the field of Muamalat Administration. Our vision: bolster the desire to uphold knowledge and produce individuals that have undergone a strong Islamic education who are able to contribute to the society, country and world at large. Our mission: determined to be a faculty that is preferred and referred to in the fields of Islamic economics and muamalat through program of study that meets the needs of the stakeholders and academic output that is relevant to the needs of the community. Currently, we offer 5 degree programs and 7 postgraduate programs, as well as Master and PhD programs by research in the fields of Islamic Muamalat, Islamic Accounting, Islamic Marketing, Islamic Corporate Administration, and Islamic Banking and Finance. In addition, the faculty is also geared to further develop the spirit of Islam by opening up space for researchers and educators to study, do research and disseminate knowledge related to Islamic economics and muamalat. The area of Muamalat Administration is one of the areas enjoined in Islam since the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Apart from that, to provide guidance to Muslims in their relationships with fellow human beings, the field of Muamalat also plays a crucial role in arranging and organizing the structure and administration of human management. The progress of a society will be measured not only in terms of its level of faith, but also its endeavors in this world. Today's modern and progressive Islamic societies must not only have a high level of knowledge in terms of monotheism, Tawhid and Shariah, but also the knowledge of Muamalat for the sake of the well-being of the members of the societies in this world and in the hereafter.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Welcome everyone to this session where we will be discussing about Islamic modern economy as well as looking at what is the emergence and emerging ideas in Islamic finance and wealth management. So that will be the focus of our discussion today. And before, inshallah, we will start the forum. Before I introduce the panelists, I would like to brief you a little bit on the partners or the collaborators of this session. Okay. We have the central coordinating body for this event is the Islamic Finance and Wealth Management Institute, IFMI, in the Faculty of Economics and Muamalat, USIM, which was established as a Center of Excellence in July 2007. It has been 13 years roundabout, the IFMI's establishment, where its primary responsibility to include showcasing of expertise, generating ideas and facilitating connection with the esteemed institution and professors. One of the professor is here today, as well as collaborating with our colleague from other universities, and also the one of the important party today is the USIM International Center. We call it here as USIM Alamiah, and USIM Strategic Communication Center, we call STRACOM, to ensure the success of today's event live from USIM TV. Our second collaborator is the Academy Zakat AZKA, established in February 2019 under the auspices of Pusat Pungutan Zakat Majlis Agama Islam Wilayah Persekutuan Mawib. And AZKA is dedicated to serving as a prominent center of excellence on zakat, philanthropy and social finance. And today AZKA plays a vital role as the primary sponsor of this event. And the third collaborator is our esteemed partner from the Faculty of Social Science and Humanities at Universiti Technology Malaysia. And they today provide the role as the sponsorship for today's event, as well as the series of events in the last 2-3 days. Okay, and surely the collaboration with the faculty now expand our linkages with our research university in Malaysia as well. And yeah, now is the time for me to introduce the forum panelists. And we have Prof. Mehmet Asutay, Professor of Middle Eastern and Islamic Political Economy and Finance, the Director of Duruham Center for Islamic Economics and Finance, Duruham University, United Kingdom. And we have second panelist, Professor Dr. Amir Shahruddin, the Director of Economic Management, Academic Management Division, USIM. And both panelists will represent their excellence in their field. Like Prof. Mehmet, I think, is the person responsible to introduce and talk about Islamic moral economy and, you know, all the connected concept around it. And Prof. Amir is in Shariah advisory, as well as he was the director for our Yayasan Wakaf Malaysia, and he has a lot of experience, inshallah, to share with us today. And yeah, I think that's the introduction for the panelists. And today we'll be talking about the emerging and the emergence of the Islamic finance and wealth management. And as I brief you, Prof. Mehmet, that the COE, the Center of Excellence, the Islamic Finance and Wealth Management, has been, you know, doing the research and engaging in the area of Islamic finance and wealth management for nearly 13 years. And I mean, with regards to the title today, you know, we would like to see, you know, what are the emerging and the emergence ideas beyond compliance, beyond Sharia compliance, that we as the researcher, we have young researchers over here from the faculties who, you know, are taking probably the legacy from us, like me and Prof. Amir, which, you know, we probably were looking at the compliance values rather than moving more outside the compliance, what we call proposition. So yeah, as a global, I mean, the researcher who has global presence and been engaging with the, you know, partners all around the world, you know, what are the emerging ideas that we can, you know, look and focus forward, Prof.
Okay, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum to everyone, and my gratitude to Professor Zurina for hosting this session, but arranging, organizing it, as well as the entire faculty. And it's good to have you here. Now, the topic of emergence in particular is highly significant in terms of understanding what particular paradigms or propositions that we are discussing. Emergence is particularly a conceptual framework, a theoretical framework, will look into evolutionary nature of economies. So in order to consider something as emergence as opposed to emergent pattern, that requires what we call organically constituted products, institutions, and theories. Therefore, emergence as a theoretical framework, as a conceptual framework, is highly important for us. And it gives us as well an opportunity to look into the practices as well as the theories and concepts we have, whether they are organically authentic, whether they represent what I call the integrity in terms of attaching to the value system, but also what consequences that it produces. And therefore it is important. And those of you who have interest in such subject areas, I would particularly encourage to look into theoretical framework or emergence and look at On the one hand, Islamic finance movement in Malaysia, but on the other hand, how the industry is doing in relation to the set objectives through Maqasid Shariah or any other framework. Now, looking from that perspective, we, as I referred, organic emergence on the one hand and Sharia compliance on the other hand. Because organic emergence directly tells us that the institutions, theories, and practices has to be directly located within the value system, in our case, in Islam. Islam's value system have to determine the entire norms, the normative aspect together with the cultural repertoire will determine the roles, and roles will result in theories and practices. What do we mean by roles? And that's perhaps the distinction, important distinction there, because with roles we will make definitions, such as what is capital, what is labor, what is land, what is climate, environment. So all those questions have to be responded in order for us to be able to constitute an economic theory and practice in relation to the value system. So that requires a horizontal, the vertical definition, a benchmark, a model for us. And that will start at the top with all ontological presence, the value that we refer, that equivalent to ontological presence. So in the case of Islam, that ontological presence, of course, tawhid. And the meaning of tawhid is very much important for us in terms of constituting a particular worldview. Because tawhid in everyday language would of course refers to oneness of God, oneness of Allah. But what that mean when it comes to social sciences or physical sciences? It particularly means, and in relation to us particularly, is the complementarity. Complementarity between different stakeholders. In other words, my interest is linked to your interest is linked to his interest, and etc. And our interest is linked to environment, and etc. Because everyone is created and everything created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the important beginning of questioning. I mean, we don't have time to go through each one of these questioning, but it is important. When we talk about a political economy system, you have to respond to three questions. One is, what is the value system? Value theory. What is your value theory? And when we refer to value theory, it is not the ethicality of it, but for instance, you have that pen in your hand, that is 5 ringgit. How we end up that to decide that is 5 ringgit, okay? So capitalism will tell you that, the exchange will determine. So you take it to the market, and in the market they will give you 5 and you will take it, and that is determined very much how much capital goes into it. Even the labor or the raw material will be determined through the capital that goes into it. So capital determines, value is determined by capital, and hence the exchange value in the market. However, socialism will tell you that no, it is not the capital, because they would disregard capital. They will say that, well, the value of that pen will be determined by labor. And so entirely labor will determine, and they will refer to the use value. As long as that pen, that pencil is useful, and then there is a value attached to that, and that will be determined by labor. However, Islam goes beyond all of that. And therefore the importance. Unfortunately, some people would consider that it is somewhere in between, a hybrid. No, it's nothing to the hybrid today. It is much larger paradigm, because Tawhid directly suggests this complementarity. So complementarity therefore suggests that all the stakeholders, including human, are linked to each other, our interests. Therefore, rather than exchange value or use value, Islam directly refers to inherent value. What is that? Because Allah created us, Allah created everything, therefore everything is important, useful, have to be taken into account in determining their return in the process. And therefore, that brings us to modes of production. In other words, how we bring the resources, the factors of productions that we have around us, bringing them together. Now, again, in capitalism, that will be capital and labor limited, and labor will be determined by capital. Socialism will disregard capital, will say that everything labor, modes of production, or the production techniques will be determined by labor. Islam would say that no, everything has to be considered. And for that matter, it is the human, and it is not labor even, it is human. Because labor is the commodified version of human. Islam disregards any commodification, and therefore would consider human in the process. It would consider climate, environment, land, and importantly society. Why society is in the equation, the modes of production, how production takes place? Because Allah created all those resources available for everyone to have access, and with privatization of resources, then some people are excluded. So they have to be compensated for exclusion, expropriation, and therefore zakat. Zakat is the only return mentioned in the Quran. While riba is prohibited, zakat has become incumbent on everyone to pay after certain income or the wealth level. Why? Because of this exclusion, because of the expropriation. So your production function has to consider society, environment, land, human, as well as in the end capital as well. So when we look at from that perspective, then the distribution, everyone goes to the production function as independent, unlike the capitalism will determine by capital. So therefore, when we look at from that perspective, emergence as a theoretical concept, as a conceptual framework, tells us that through the value system of Islam, the norms, and remember the experience of the Prophet ﷺ, the cultural repertoire. So in the society, you had certain practices, the Hanif practices, Mudaraba, Musharaka, and etc. So they were subjected to the norms of Islam and accepted. Some of those practices were accepted. The roles will determine, and hence new institutional forms emerged and new practices emerge, such as, of course, the Quranic institutions, zakat, and also in the Muslim society during the time of Prophet ﷺ, the emergence of Waqf as an institution, but importantly as well, the Medina market is an amazing story for us to understand, which I would encourage our colleagues, the young generation, to look into that, because then we would understand. Unlike some colleagues in Islamic economics and finance who rationalizes the market system, we would see that it is not the market system that Islam essentializes, because market, it has its own logic. However, within Islam, market is only a place. It is located into the value system of Islam rather than having its own logic imposed on the rest. And that's the market which essentializes justice. So looking at the dynamic, therefore colleagues would refer to Ibn Taymiyyah's statement that Ibn Taymiyyah stated that the price established in the market is the price of Allah. Yes, but which market? It's not the market system. It's the market as exchange shaped by the Islamic value system of justice. That is the one. And therefore, Bourdieu, for instance, in modern times, would suggest that it is not the prices that determine everything. On the contrary, everything comes together to determine price. So that causality is important for us to understand. Now, that's the emergence. That will be authentic, that will be an organic emergence. Then we would be able to say that we have put our efforts together, constituted a theoretical model, and then in relation to that, how Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and etc. constitute they depending on what is available in their societies and model. But when it comes to Sharia compliance, therefore, it's important for us to understand the logic, therefore, as I mentioned. Sharia compliance is very much based on transferring of the institutional logic that the market system has and bringing into the Islamic realm and trying to constitute an hybridity. And that hybridity, of course, there's nothing wrong, by the way, with hybrid. As I mentioned, there were practices during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. He subjected them to the norms and accepted. But there is one particular distinction. While he was doing it, Islam was hegemonic. What determined that is one practice acceptable or not, it was the Islamic value system. And today, however, we have the global capitalism tells us that, look, this is the practice, you have to accept it in order to be considered a bank. So what happens then, we are grafted, we are asked to shape into the shape that they are imposing on us, because hegemony is global capitalism. That distinction is important. And therefore that results in the banking institutional logic will tell you what you can do, what you cannot do, despite the fact that you are saying that the textbook, we go to the class, master class, undergrad, will say that Islamic finance is profit and loss sharing, and then where is profit and loss sharing? You look at the bank's data, there is no profit and loss sharing. There is no risk sharing. So what happens? And that's the grafting process. As opposed to emergence and looking into an authentic emergence, what we have a grafting process. We are grafted into the existing system through Sharia compliance. For instance, Basel criteria. You would go to any central bank in the world, they will say that the banking system will follow the Basel criteria. The moment you say that Basel, you are attached to Basel criteria, you have to give away profit and loss sharing and risk sharing.
Because of the risk factor to it.
The risk management. Okay, at that moment. So you are grafted into that processes. And therefore Sharia compliance, as a result of that, then you have to bring a layer of Sharia compliance to Sharia boards to look into within this institutional logic what kind of offerings that you can provide, but importantly, of course, reverse engineering will result in existing practices brought into the Sharia compliance process, and then unfortunately reverse engineering. So this is what we would call emergent pattern, as opposed to organic emergence.
Okay.
So it is this is just a pattern. Pattern in relation to existing banking logic or existing finance logic, but it is not authentic in the sense of institutional form. So that distinction is important, and this is currently what we have. By saying that we are not condemning Islamic banking and finance, but what we are saying that in particular with the young generation, this is not the end of history. This is not even in the beginning of history. It is my generation has not provided that authenticity, authentic emergence, but your generation therefore has to work to look into how organic emergences, different imaginaries can be possible, because at the end of the day our objective is to deliver justice. If one set of patterns that we have is not fulfilling that justice, then what kind of emergences that we can look into, theories, institutions, and practice to ensure that the iqtisad terms, the moral economy terms can be responded. Because rather than using Islamic economics, you might have noticed either I use Islamic moral economy and I express that within the term iqtisad. Although iqtisad translated as economics by Izzy, but it has its own value system, because every word in Arabic, you might know that it has the roots and the meanings. So when we look at iqtisad, qasd and the qist, the justice. So the objective is justice and putting everything in their place. because we talk about tawhid, the complementarity. So putting everything into their place, ensuring that everything will get their share out of it. And hence, that brings us the whole privilege idea. Islam will consider life privilege. And therefore, it is different than capitalist understanding of right. Because if it is right, I have to maximize. Okay? However, it is privilege, the complementarity. I have to consider your growth while I'm trying to grow. I have to consider environment while I'm growing. So therefore, instead of utility function, you have the falah function. Because mine, yours, others, and hereafters. So all these differences will bring entirely a new theoretical framework and practice, and therefore that will take you away from market logic, which is based on utilitarianism, and therefore the shareholder value maximization into the Islam's extended stakeholding because of the complementarities. And therefore the distinction between Sharia compliance, the grafting process, and therefore the market logic as a result of that, and hence Sharia shareholder value maximization, despite the fact that Islamic value system suggests entirely a different sets of values, principles, practices, and institutional forms. And hence, importance of research and development, because emergence is at the same time very important in relation to research, because what we see, and as we have been discussing, unfortunately we are very much bounded as researchers with the industry. We are theoretizing the industry rather than constituting a benchmark model, an organic emergence, and suggesting to the industry that, look, rather than you graft us after being grafted, and then you graft us as researchers, no, this is the theoretical model that we are proposing, and we would expect Islamic banks to move out from shareholder value maximization into extended stakeholding, so that the interests of everyone in the society within that complementarities can be possible. And therefore we have to move on. And hence the importance of research and development, going beyond the imposed paradigms and looking into new imaginaries are very much important. I should stop there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Mehmet. I think that's, moving from emergence, the organic emergence, moving from what we are now, where now we are having imposed emergence, so to call. I think that is a long order.
Yes.
But then I think probably we could say that our first generation of Islamic economists, Prof. Khurshid Ahmed, Omar Chapra, and now we have you and Zamir Iqbal and the like, and probably we are the brother and sister of Islamic finance, or the aunties, and now it's the next generation, which is 30 years after its first establishment. Then probably we have the psychological attachment to what have been developed by our father of Islamic economics and finance. And probably what you are saying is, I'm putting words into your mouth, but this is what I understood, that it's time to doing the evaluation on what our value system and how it is being grafted, and now it's time for going back to the values and norms that we have within Islamic finance. I mean, that is even if we go to the theoretical aspect, again, there is nothing wrong with it. People will say you are theorizing, and doing that process again and again, then when you're going to move? But then that is the Islah process that we have to do during the process, right?
And that's a continuous process.
Because
you would have in this moral economy, you express it justice and ihsan and adala and ihsan. And ihsan is very much important. Again, an important research area we don't notice, because ihsan implies that, of course, the equilibrium, sustainable, sustaining the equilibrium through which Allah created, and therefore how we can continuously sustain that that balance, order that Allah created the world, because everything linked to each other. Remember the tawheed and how that can be. And therefore, that justice and adala and ihsan, and the sustaining that, and when there are gaps, how we can therefore continue with the Islah process. And a Islah process is not a static process, continuous process. The tazkiyah process continues to ensure that the outcomes are delivered, expected outcomes are delivered, and hence you are not saying that this is the model, I finished it, that's it. No, it's a continuous process, and that's an important part, because that is the fitrah. And the fitrah, because an important aspect of Islamic knowledge in relation to Islamic economics as well, it is Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. And at the same time, Islam refers to the belief system, Iman refers to the practice of it, and Ihsan is the perfection process of ensuring that equilibrium in the society.
Now we are putting the responsibility to the new generation.
Yes.
Inshallah, we trust.
We have to
them.
work together. We respect the founding fathers. I always salute their courage in the modern times, coming up with ideas that we have to bring the authenticity to economic life as well. They have done a great job. But we should not consider that that's the end of history. We have to continue to work on developing an essential model through which we can shape the operational nature of whether we call it banking and finance, whatever, in the end, because we do not know what will emerge as a result of that. But even in relation to Islamic banking, how we can put our efforts together to make sure that it delivers at least some of the objectives that we are discussing here, rather than just moving capital from A to B, khalas, finished, that's all. No, what consequences that we produce, that's an important. And intention in Islam, intention is essential, but that does not exclude the consequence. The tawheed requires, in terms of knowledge, intention and the consequence should be complementary to each other. So we have to look into how we can achieve that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and what I would like to follow to what Prof. Mehmet was saying about the stakeholders, we have to internalize the extended stakeholders' role in the development of Islamic finance, in the development of Islamic economic and finance in Malaysia, also at the global level. So, I mean, how Dr. Amir, Prof. Amir, we relate to, you know, the not the creation, but how we internalize the value of the extended stakeholders to our maqasid Shariah consideration when we are, you know, planning for projects, making decision, consider options and so on. And what have you seen in terms of the development of the adoption of maqasid within the Islamic capital market and Islamic banking? Sila, Prof.
Thank you, Prof. Zurina, and also Prof. Mehmet, and also my colleague friends. It's a very interesting discussion when Prof. Mehmet talk about the emergence and organic emergence of industry, Islamic finance industry. I would like to continue Prof. Mehmet's points on the global trend. I think in Malaysia, in the industry, we do have like the concept of ESG has been put in place in our Islamic finance banking institution. This is, I think, is a global trend. It's not origin from the Islamic banking industry itself, but we adopt this global trend and we try to implement it in our institution. So we see when we make new products, we must align with ESG concept, the environment, how Islamic banking product will impact environment, social, and the governance. So, people talk about how this ESG is aligned with maqasid, whether we do have this concept in maqasid al-Shariah. Of course, we do have this maqasid and ESG. I can say that 90% are all in line with maqasid, but unfortunately, because the ESG, SDGs come from the West, the global trend that was put place in our Islamic finance institution, then we have to justify whether our Islamic finance industry also can be aligned with ESG and SDG concept. So this is the what I'm trying to say is here is that the theory and the practices. So and also the global trends. So when as a Shariah advisor and Shariah committee, that when we evaluate new products now, then this question will arises, and we have to evaluate this from the point of SDG and ESG. So nowadays we are more aware and then we concerned about these practices, and we need to think about this ESG and all these global trends. Okay, and then the second point that I would like to share, here in Malaysia, I think Prof. Mehmet also aware that we come up with the concept of VBI, value-based intermediation. This is to try to demonstrate that after a while of practicing Islamic finance in Malaysia, then we try to demonstrate that Islamic finance industry also have been given impact to society, how we must create value to our society. So this is of our effort, try to give benefit to the society. And then we have nowadays we have a lot of zakat and wakaf practices. And when I was in Yayasan Wakaf Malaysia, so I see one of the challenges that one of the challenges that we are facing is the capabilities and the competency of our wakaf institution, because we want to improve our wakaf institution, but we have a very serious issue of the competency and the capabilities of the managers of the wakaf. And then we know that in Malaysia, our wakaf and zakat, and we have quite a significant, huge amount of zakat that we collected. But the issue now is how we distribute the zakat. So we really need researchers try to advise wakaf institution and zakat institution in order to distribute the wakaf efficiently. So this is, I try to bring the discussion into the practices where what is the issues, the emerging issues among the Islamic finance, especially from the Islamic social finance perspective. So, Prof. Zurina, this is...
Yeah, there is a reason why I'm smiling, because zakat institution, according to Prof. Mehmet Asutay, is not a social finance proposition that that's how we're gonna see zakat and wakaf, especially zakat institution. But yeah, I mean we understood where from Prof. Amir is coming from, where now Prof. Amir is saying that because of the probably little competency that we have within the the management of wakaf and zakat, then that introduce or that result to less efficiency, one, and then lack of probably growth in terms of what we are supposed to do. I mean, if you compare what we're supposed to do and what has been done, there are like great gap that still present in the industry. I would like in terms of what Prof. Amir has mentioned about ESG and maqasid, whether again this is the grafting taking place, right? I mean, even so, when we are talking about the maqasid evaluation of our own institutions, then we are still taking what others have imposed on us.
Positivism.
Then from your experience, do you have like alternative ways on how we could talk about like standard stakeholder and then, you know, share some ideas with our young researchers so that, you know, how we could at least start to move to have our like organic emergence in terms of, especially, you know, with regards to maqasid evaluation and our value system. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Professor Zurina. Perhaps just to explain first my position on Islamic social finance. I know it has become a common language currently in the Islamic finance circles and everywhere, including Islamic Development Bank. But I feel that by labeling zakat and waqf as social finance, despite the fact that there's a social there, we are bringing these institutions into financial world as part of financialization. I consider, and which has been the case until recently, zakat and waqf has always been classified as Islamic social welfare institutions. So that distinction is important. I feel that we should continue to stress. Yes, they do financing activities, financing poor people, needy, other causes, but that will not make them as social finance or the finance institution. And I have a concern, as I mentioned, because I feel that this slowly takes these very valuable institutions into the financialized world, and that's my concern. The only Islamic social finance institution, or not necessarily only, but the major Islamic social finance instrument that we have is Qard al-Hasan, because that's a financial instrument, that's a social finance instrument, and that distinction has to be made. Qard al-Hasan is an Islamic social finance instrument. However, zakat and waqf is Islamic social welfare institutions they are. So having said that, of course, the causality, again, it runs ESG stories and the narrative emerging, negotiations have been taking place, and one way or another, global markets requires now your institutions, banking and finance, to reveal not only banking but corporations also, to demonstrate certain qualities around ESG. We have to accept that despite certain criticism that we raise against sustainability discourse as well as the ESGs, but we have to appreciate in relation to 1960s, 70s, where within the capitalism you would not be able to talk about any social objective. The famous Friedman's statement that the only social responsibility that corporations have is maximizing their profit. So considering from that position to this position where there is a global morality that is emerging, regardless how effective it is, because my concern is it does not deal with the initial equation. It tells us that, look, let's continue with capital, labor, and technology-based production function, disregard the other stakeholders, but when we, after the production process, then we'll correct the consequences, moderate the consequences. I think that's an important concern that we should have, and therefore it's an emerging pattern rather than emergence. Because if it was emergence, if we have concern for environment, people, land, whatever, in the production function, in other words, modes of production, these stakeholders have to be included, okay? But they are not. So ESGs or the SDGs do not touch the initial equation, the modes of production or the value theory, and therefore it is still utilitarian, shareholder value maximization, but they said that will moderate the consequences. But when we come to that level, we already polluted the environment. So how we are going to correct that?
It has become the externalities at the end of the process.
Has already been. So the process that, well, will create a market for carbon emission. the further financialization,
Yeah.
okay? And you are not solving the problem, unfortunately. And therefore, then that's very much related organic emergence and the emerging pattern. And therefore, from that perspective, of course, we are left with the reality at the same time. On the one hand, we have to work to develop this imaginary, but on the other hand, we have to look into how we can bring our corporations, including Islamic banks and financial institutions, into this extended stakeholding model. So the current practice, we keep them as a governance model, as shareholder value maximization, but we'll bring layers. Through the layers, we'll make them compliant with sustainability and ESGs. So that's a practice globally acceptable, because then immediately when you refer to moving into much progressive in terms of Islamic values and extended stakeholding model, unfortunately we won't be able to get our institutions to accept that. We worked with a colleague of mine developing a sustainability guide for Islamic banks for Shafii, and during which they facilitated access to Shariah scholars and banking and financiers. One of the leading Shariah scholars, when we were engaging to look into the rationale for sustainability, he suggested that it sounds good, but we cannot afford. Why? He stated, because we don't have enough wealth generated to be able to respond to the sustainability. Then you would tell them that, look, conventional banks are doing. Then the response was, they have been around few hundred years. They have accumulated a lot. They can afford, but we are only 40 years. We haven't accumulated enough. So when you relegate the entire discourse to that level, of course, it's very much difficult to be able to make a difference. Having said that, I'm not despondent, or I'm not suggesting despondency, but we have to respond to the emerging issues around us. The flooding happens, earthquakes happens, the heavy heat waves around us. The climate change is a reality affecting everyone, and hence we had earthquake, unfortunately, in Morocco. We pray for their souls who passed away and recovery for the rest, but Libya is flooded. And these are everyday happenings around the world. And therefore we have to respond to those matters. It is public policy, of course, to prepare the necessary ground. And in Malaysia, with the value-based intermediation, public policy suggested that we know you are Islamic, but your value is not Islamic enough. Let's have value-based intermediation so that we can bring you back a bit to the basics. So these are valuable attempts, and we have to celebrate them and to make sure that we work towards them. But at the same time, we should not lose the sight that our objective is to bring that authentic emergence. Now, having said that, of course, ESG, we use ESGs, and some people use SDGs, which I'm very cautious of. But ESG's framework, using ESG framework, establishing some similarity with Maqasid Shariah, that has been an empirical process through which we can look at those issues. Because when you do not have the organic emergence, this is what we have, and we have to deal with that. Now, of course, this is important exercise, but one important thing to bring to attention, and therefore the difficulty that we face, theoretical difficulty, one is Islamic social formation is very much based on real individuals. In other words, corporations did not emerge in the Muslim world. Professor Timur Kuran, a critique of Islamic economics, but at the same time contributed a lot to the debate on underdevelopment in the Muslim world, suggesting that it is the Islamic law that resulted in that underdevelopment. One of the causes he would refer is corporations. Muslim world did not develop corporations. Now, in responding to that, my response, it is not because Muslims were not clever enough or innovative enough to come up with an institutional form that is called corporations. No, on the contrary, Islam rejects the emergence of corporations, because by being corporations, then they develop a particular claim on the wealth that is created.
Shareholders' value.
Yep, shareholders' value. And they do not, however, take responsibility when it fails as such. When they earn, it is private profit. When they fail, it becomes a social failure that we have to pay for it because of their failures and the bailout processes and etc. And such as the case, for instance, in the UK, we have this energy price hike. But at the same time, energy companies shooting their profits up. From what? The resources that Allah created for everyone to have access. So the resources that's supposed to be used for public, it is privatized, as we referred earlier in the case of zakat, it is privatized by a particular group, a company called corporation, and they wreck the profits, and the people have to pay for it, despite the fact that people are the owners. Therefore, if you look at, for instance, a radical departure, Norway, around 10 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, decided to increase the taxes that they impose on the oil companies. You may know that it's an oil and gas rich company, to 78%. When the prime minister of the time was criticized, and his response was that oil belongs to public, and public is responsible. So therefore, Norway is one of the best welfare states. The return of the wealth of people to people rather than giving to corporations. So therefore, we have to look at the essential issues and then how we are going to deal this. Now we have, despite the fact that we have corporations problem essentialized in Islam, we did not produce as an institution, again, grafting process. But we have them, so we have to deal with them. And therefore ESGs or Maqasid al-Sharia and all that will be. But the difficulty with ESGs, you do not have problem, but Maqasid al-Sharia. So you have an institutional form, and this is colleagues here with Sharia background, fiqh. I would really urge you to research into emergence of institutional form, the corporations, okay? I know there's a justification through Waqf, justify the corporations, but as an institutional form, it's not Islamic as such. Islam did not produce. So how then we have an institutional form, corporations, other than real individuals, how we can apply maqasid, which I did, I'm also culprit in that, how we can apply maqasid to a corporation, because maqasid is individual. Individual has responsibilities, whether Ghazalian 5, which has its own problems, or other forms 7, 8, or not limiting at all, but how we can apply a particular framework directed to individuals, but transferring that responsibility of fulfilling maqasid to institutions. Okay, so can institution be ikhlas? Can institution be pious? These are important questions. I fully agree. I smile as well, because that's an important existential question. But of course, beyond that, one way or another, we have to look into how they are doing their progress in relation to certain positive outcomes that we would expect, at least in a very pragmatic sense, in a very eclectic sense, by noting that eclecticism, we use maqasid, we use in terms of establishing a simulation with ESGs and look into it. But in doing that, at least, rather than limiting ourselves to Ghazalian 5, because Ghazalian 5 is not progressive. it refers to protection, it's safeguarding. But as Amar Chopra would say that safeguarding and protection happens when you are at the zenith of it. However, we are in the necessity part of it, zarura part of it. We are progressing, and therefore in the progressing you cannot. And therefore he used the term immigration, okay, progressiveness, and also not necessarily limiting with 5, but looking at extensively, such as bringing environment, bringing the amana, the whole amana concept, bringing all the extended stakeholders to the maqasid, but also importantly, again, because colleagues are here, researchers, young generation, importantly, maqasid is very much individual oriented, as we mentioned. At the same time, if we are to use the Ghazalian maqasid, then if I am protecting my mal, my capital, my wealth, or my nestle, and all these categories, if I am protecting, can I ensure that at the same time I'm contributing to the social well-being? Now that's the Adam Smithian problem for you, because Adam Smith said that if we each maximize, in the end, social welfare will be maximized. But we know that that did not work. So the similar manner, if each one of us go with the Ghazalian maqasid and fulfill the Ghazalian maqasid at individual level, whether we will be able to fulfill the whole society's, if I use the term maqasid. And therefore, rather than limiting maqasid to individual level, but expanding that in Qayyim, in Nashur, all contributions are out there, how we can look into, again, theory making, theory constitution, constitute new imaginaries, and then at least use those imaginaries rather than replicating. Ghazali said 5, and someone used it in Islamic finance. Even Chopra himself initially used Ghazali 5, but when you look at his later work, he would say that he will bring this criticism and he would expand it. And let's work towards such objectives, inshallah. Yes, maqasid, let's use it, because that's the only thing that we left for us, and we are forced to use it because we have this institution, but at least bring into a more systematized maqasidal framework, so that we can produce better outcomes. And this is particularly important because when we go to Islamic banking industry, Sharia scholars, financiers, and etc., the most capitalist one would say that everything is maqasid. The most critical one, like myself, would say that, we want maqasid. So if they want maqasid, but their maqasid is producing capitalism, and everyone is doing maqasid somehow, but nothing is happening in the end. Therefore, we have to look into how the consistency and integrity can be ensured. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. So probably from what Prof. Mehmet has discussed, there will be at least 3 to 5, area to be fundamentally researched within maqasid Sharia framework. Like reimagining the theories, and then for us not to adopt ESG, SDG without the context of the Islamic economics and finance framework.
So that we can overcome this, what I call the maqasid washing at the same time.
Because when the mitigation, rectification come after the implementation, then that will be externalities already happening. So I would like to pick up on that and ask Prof. Amir, because Sharia committee is a responsibility to make decision with regards to Sharia compliance, right? So in implementing maqasid, or in putting taking the spirit of maqasid in decision making, what do you think are the tools that we have, or guidance that we have within the industry, or the awareness even that we, the Sharia committee, are taking the responsibility to have the intention right, the guidance right before we make decision, and then not only we like greenwash or maqasid wash at the end of the day.
Thank you, Prof. Zurina. I think during our meeting on the Shariah committee meeting, most of the decision that need us to consider will be tabled by the management of the bank. And the management of the bank, when they present a product, a new product, or rectification of modification of their product, we as a Shariah committee, we will depend on their rely on their information that they give. So what they want and what they need, what they ask us is based on the information that they presented to us. Then we have to make a decision. So the information is very critical. So as a Shariah committee, we will be very critical. We will ask further and ask for information further if we think that the information is not sufficient. So what I'm trying to say here is that the Shariah, the maqasid of Shariah will come into picture when we will not only make decision in favor of the bank or in favor of the institution that we are advising. We will also look into what are the consideration for the customers, for the client, and also for the beyond client relationship with the bank. So this is important consideration that we will take, will make, and we will evaluate all the information that presented to us. So in other words, we as a Shariah advisor, we will try to strike balance between the needs of the industry and also the impact to the society. This is what we're trying to do the best.
So we are kind of gatekeeper and then protector, so to call, being the organ of Shariah governance, like Shariah committee, management, board of directors. Then it's the responsibility to be the protector and gatekeeper, so to call,
to everyone, to all the stakeholders. So I would like to continue Prof. Mehmet's suggestion on the Qadr Hasan when he said that Qadr Hasan is one of the component of Islamic social finance. So I would like to share one of our banks in Malaysia which train the small and micro businesses. So they try to initiate this Qadr Hasan and they select 20 for the first year of micro businesses and give a Qadr Hasan to these businesses and try to develop them from zakat recipient into a zakat payer. They try to transform these businesses by giving the Qadr Hasan. The first year, yes, they managed to do that with the training that also they gave to these businesses. And after second year, then they increase the numbers of recipients of this Qadr Hasan. And the next, the third year, when they give this Qadr Hasan, then they see the success of these projects. Then they come to researchers. So what's next? When they have successfully implement the project, then what's next? So I think this is area where our researcher, we need researcher, because when I see this industry, when they do initiative, they do without the thought process. So this is how we researchers, we can help assist to give the theoretical, the framework, then they can improve and evaluate their projects. So this is our roles as researchers, I think, to help industry, how to assist them and how to make their projects better.
Okay, now Prof. Amir is throwing us another opportunity. This is now industry research. You were suggesting fundamental research. Yeah, I think we will have some questions from the audience. We have expertise from taxation here. When Prof. Mehmet was saying about greenwashing, probably, you know, our Director of Islamic Finance and Wealth Management, Dr. Islawani, you know, would like to probably ask question or response to it. And we have Dr. Anu Ashikin, the finance expert, Dr. Fuadah as the zakat and wakaf researcher, and we have 4 young researchers here who probably would like to ask question to Mehmet and Prof Amir on what are specific area of question that we would like to ask. So yeah, please if you have further question. And not to forget, we have Prof Zulkifli Hassan as the Shariah specialist, Shariah advisors, and we have Dr. Aniza as well as Dr. Shifa from UKM. So you can ask question and engage if you want. And not to forget Dr. Zati. So please.
Okay, maybe I raise question. My question is just a basic question. In what ways can Islamic finance and wealth management adapt to modern financial trends while remaining rooted in Islamic principle, going beyond Sharia compliance?
So again, how to go beyond Sharia compliance? 1, 2, 3 tips from you?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think again it comes back to the question, what do we mean by modern finance? Because with modern finance, of course, you have hedge funds, derivatives, all these toxic products which we are expected to avoid. And hence, but slowly also we see that such trends coming into and affecting us, the futures market and all that. And therefore, caution, I would put caution on that. One major concern I have is the whole financialization process. The domination of finance for the sake of finance, and finance becoming the main wealth management process in a fictitious manner. I think my concerns will be as long as we do not contribute to the financialization and we do not contribute to the commodification, but consider what consequences that we produce, as long as we provide the Islamic value system, I think we will be on the safe side. It's very much interesting. Schiller's book, The Good Society. I don't know whether it's translated or you guys have seen that, but I would suggest those of you interested in subject matter to read Schiller's The Good Society, a Nobel Prize winner academic from United States. Yeah? So The Good Society, in which he talks about the role of finance. He would say that finance should not be as just for the sake of creating wealth, but finance has to be embedded with the objective of a society. And as long as finance fits into the objective of society, contributes to the well-being, that is the good society that he refers. So rather than finance dominating as we are having today, somehow the 2021 data would suggest that real economy, we measure by GDP, is only 8% of the financial assets. The story should be the other way around, but unfortunately, because of the heavy financialization and all this fictitious construct of financial assets, unfortunately, GDP has become a smaller portion, while finance was supposed to be a smaller portion of GDP. So that's the modern scenario we have. We do not want to be part of that scenario, because that does not consider well-being of stakeholders, including human. However, our objective is the well-being through maqasid, well-being of humans and other stakeholders. And therefore, whatever the innovative process we will come up with, our responsibility as Muslims with Islamic ethics have to be fulfilling that justice condition and hence producing the outcomes that we have with whatever the financial model that we come up with. In other words, rather than it dictating as an engineering process, rather than finance dictating us what it wants to do, we have to, as with our value system, we have to dictate finance what we want finance to do for us within the Islamic value system. And therefore, this objective function, first we have to agree on the objective function. What is our objective function? Is to maximize profit through finance and expansion of finance, or our objective is financing people. I was walking in Brussels for a conference on a workshop on Islamic finance, and I saw this financial building, a conventional one. But I saw this amazing statement on the main facade of this huge building. It was saying that protecting and financing people. Wow, I said, why we cannot see that in Islamic financial institution? This is the whole narrative, protecting people and other stakeholders and financing them, rather than instrumentalizing humans and other stakeholders for profit-making objective. So that's the protecting human and other stakeholder has to be the objective function, means and the ends. Human and the stakeholder well-being is the end, rather than they are being as currently what we have, rather than they are being made as means. So we are working for the institutions to make profit, rather than institutions making profit to serve the well-being. So therefore, that objective function is important for us to identify. And therefore, it's curiosity for me to look into the vision and the vision and mission statement of Islamic banks. And a lot of disappointments there. Not only there, I don't know whether you guys have noticed, but if you have gone to Mecca, just opposite to the main entrance of the Haram, of course, you have these clock towers and the buildings. One of the tall, huge buildings there, huge gate, not gate, a door and glass door, and in that it will say that, welcome to the most elite land. Welcome to the most elite land, in the place where it is supposed to be most equal place.
Inclusive.
Yeah, it is supposed to be the most equal place on earth, okay? And then the statement, as opposed to the Belgian statement, okay? Welcome to the most elite land. A hotel block in just opposite Mecca. So these are important concern, and therefore a critical thinking, perhaps I should have mentioned before, since I opened this topic, let me add that as well, such as the clock tower. I go around Malaysia, you don't have clock tower, as I haven't seen, but in the Muslim world you hardly see clock tower. In Istanbul you have in Dolmabahce Palace, but it is a French construct anyway, but in the other parts you do not see. Because clock towers directly relates with the emergence of capitalism through industrial revolution, and therefore in every corner and the town of UK, reminding people the shift time, the efficiency and all that. Now with the Sukuk supporting all this so-called development around Kaaba and Mecca, or Medina for that matter as well, so you have clock tower. So what's the symbolic meaning of clock tower there? Okay, so efficiency,
Checking time.
in your prayers, in your Umrah, in your Hajj. If you are a fan of Manchester United playing, so you can say, I can finish the Umrah in 20 minutes, 20 minutes, I'll go up. So these are important. These are not innocent issues. Therefore, I think an important issue that we have to bring to our Islamic economics and finance programs, the critical thinking, the discourse making, because these are directly related discourse. And therefore, looking from that perspective, we have to look at the means and the ends. We have to identify that. Of course, in recent years, we have seen the emergence of fintech. We've seen in the emergence of crowdfunding, blockchains, cryptocurrencies, and etc. These are new exciting areas. But how much it brings us closer to value system and how much it instrumentalizes. In other words, our objective is the substantive morality, not the instrumentalist morality, using Islam to justify certain acts, and rather It is a substantive morality that our objective, whatever we do, produce a good in the end. Whether fintechs, whether it is the cryptos, whether it's all this digital economy, sustainability we are discussing, whether we can produce that, but we have to put that as an objective function, whatever we are doing. Because fintech is technology, or other technologies, digital economy is not innocent. The way technology is produced is based on particular ontological base as well. It's always linearity. It's always linear. I asked that question, the silly question, whether 5 is superior to 4, or 4 is superior to 5, or 4 is equal to 5. It's a silly question, but an algorithm will always tell you that 5 is superior to 4. But if you have a return, portfolio return, 5 has riba, 4 doesn't have riba. Now, which one is superior for you? 4 is superior, despite the fact that technology would tell you, if you do not provide the technology your language, your objective function, again, it will continue because it's a linear programming, linear growth and all that, it will give you the same outcome. Therefore, we have to get our language as well in this new technological area, our language embedded into it. I mean, there is this anecdote, and I'll close with that. Just when the financial crisis erupted that week, the Queen of UK, late Queen Elizabeth II, had a scheduled meeting to the London Stock Exchange, but she decided not to cancel despite the eruption of financial crisis, global financial crisis. So she goes there, and the chairman, all these professors, people working there, they show all these amazing sophisticated models, data analysis and all that. And she's amazed, but with her wisdom, she asked a simple question which brings me to the objective function. She says that you have had all this and you couldn't guess this. So you had all this sophistication, all this data, everything there, and the financial crisis happened.
Cannot be predicted.
Yeah, you couldn't predict that, and they couldn't respond. You see, it's amazing existential question she asked. And 10 days later or sometime, the chairperson wrote like 2 pages of letters explaining that it is the human behavior in the end that you couldn't guess. So therefore, technology is amazing, the new area, but we have to get technology to read our objectives and work in line with our objectives. That's an important part, and going beyond the Sharia compliance. And therefore, the centrality is important part of the centralizing the finance is the new area with digitalization, but at the same time, with cryptocurrencies, my feeling is that we will be creating a lot of hegemonies which will control us. That's something that I'll leave that with you guys to consider, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Mehmet. And I think the real question, or the most important question that we have to address post to discussing this, is that, you know, who are the party who will be responsible to internalize the normative value that we have within the Islamic economics and finance to be part of the function, and not to be something that is alien to that process, and then later it will produce you know, bad impacts to the extended stakeholders. I mean, it's not the environment that we are, you know, over leveraging, but you know, we take the human as the tools as well in that process, within that process. So I'm just wondering, you know, within the stakeholders, within the decision makers in the organization, who are the most important person? Are they management? Because we are talking, you know, within the setting of corporation right now, Islamic banks and takaful and the Sharia compliant institutions, whether it's the board of directors, whether it's the top management or the management of the institution, or the Shariah committee, which are, these three parties are critical in decision making, and how that three parties are actually ready to make it inclusive, that decision making within that Islamic finance process is being inculcated into that production function, or that decision making function, so that externalities wouldn't happen. So probably that is a question to all of us to ponder, and to research further. I think if any of you,
I can have
please.
a quick response to Prof. Zurina's question. I think because this remind me to yesterday we had a discussion in one of our takaful companies, where we have a scenario where the claim is more than the accumulated participants fund. So then to answer your question, the bottom line is still profit, because even the takaful is supposed to protect people, protect and cover the parties participated, but still the bottom line is the profit. The management will always ensure that they have sufficient fund to cover they are not in deficit. So we had a scenario yesterday where the fund is in deficit. So what to do? And then they said shareholder have to top up the deficit. So what I'm trying to say here is that still, when we talk about the industry, still the bottom line is the profit. So Islamic banking or takaful companies, they exist not to, they said not to do charity. They have to take a profit, give profit, and then make profit. And this is to answer your question, who is the most important people who make this decision. So I think it's an inclusive decision. Board has to make sure that the company is in good situation, and management will carry out all the decision to make sure that they are not in the loss. So Shariah committee and all other parties is just to support that the company will sustain and survive.
That goes back to the observation of the Shariah committee when you are looking into the SDG, was it SDG, ESG in Sibafi?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sustainability.
Sustainability. But then, that probably happened again because of the we haven't inculcate the Shariah value, the normative value within the production function itself. So it becomes that it's a requirement to look at the profit first, and then everything else.
To moderate that. Moderate the consequences always. For instrumentalize the morality, that is.
So again, there is a need for to look again at the theory, to go back from, to backstep and not backstabbing, backstepping our steps.
One or two step back.
To step back and to look again at the value proposition that we have.
Certainly.
And Prof Mehmet and Prof Amir, we have questions from the YouTube, because we are streaming now live on USIM TV, and it's now being streamed at YouTube. And then we have a question from Bey, that is, a guy from, it's a guy term in Turkish, right? Bey Bayan.
Yes.
Okay. And then Bey. Mister. And the question is, how to innovate the Islamic wealth management practices, considering its unique ethical and Shariah compliant practices. Because I have the idea as well that when you limit things, because Shariah compliant have certain requirement, and then that probably create another proposition to Islamic wealth management practices, and that how that limitation and different norms could be taken as innovation moving forward to the Islamic wealth management practices. Yeah.
Okay, I think the difference between Enlightenment ontology, which produced capitalism, and religious ontology, including Islamic ontology, is the nature of constraints, constrained behavior. Islam, like other religions, refers to constrained behavior. And therefore, when we look at historically, including the Western world, when they were very much into Christianity, the constrained world, the behavior resulted in entirely different sets of relations than we have today. The moral economies, they had the moral economies as well. But when you remove the constraints, and that is an important distinction when the debate comes to why Muslim world could not develop. Okay, because we are looking at the question itself problematic, because it looks at a particular ontology, the Enlightenment ontology, the Western ontology, which remove all the constraints and then say that, look guys, you couldn't develop. No, these are two different paradigms. Because when the world was run by constraints, constrained behavior, we do not see distinctions in terms of the progress of societies. The Baghdad of the 15th century was not different than or underdeveloped compared to Madrid or Paris or London, because the constrained behavior was very much hegemonic. But when you remove the constrained behavior, what happened? When they said that God is dead and therefore you are free, whatever you want to do, the entire continent became slave. Entire continent, Africa. Okay? So, and what we have today as a result of unconstrained behavior, climate problem. Okay? You have environmental problem. You have unequal distribution of wealth, crazily unequal distribution of wealth and income. You have poverty and all that. Why? Because this unconstrained behavior. And therefore, constrained behavior. And today what we are saying is with the SDGs, we are saying that, look, we have to constrain. So when you do your consumption, plastic, let's remove the plastic, this and that. So constraints are coming back one way or another. Not through religion, a secular morality is bringing a certain kind of constraints to the behavior. So therefore, constrained behavior is essential because it enables us to relate to other stakeholders and their interests. There wasn't anything wrong with constrained behavior. So Islam, like any other religion, has constrained behavior. Enlightenment didn't have, but where we ended up, and therefore the global morality talks about the constraints. And therefore, within that, innovation has to be within that constraint world. You cannot remove those constraints and come. And this is the problematic part perhaps we are currently going through, because institutional logic of Islamic banking based on that ontology which remove the constraints. Okay. However, in everyday life as Muslims, we are living in constraints. You have hijab, constraints. Well, go to prayers. We cannot take riba and all that. Okay, the constrained world. And therefore, we have to look at innovation within this constraint world rather than have these hybrid identities. In our everyday practice of religion, somehow it is constraint world, and then we go to the market, we go to the banking and finance, we go crazy. No, that would not happen. The hybridity in terms of identity creates what this author calls it, when it enables you to go into the comfort area. And therefore you feel that you have solved the problem. In your everyday life, you are, mashallah, Muslim, and you wreck a lot of profits through the capitalist system. What else? And therefore, he would say that the problem with hybridity, it moves you into this comfort zone, and the search for authenticity stops. Okay, so your innovations now becomes not within the constrained world, but it goes beyond that, okay? Because you are in the comfort zone, you do not need to look for authenticity anymore. So the search for authenticity stops, and therefore you replicate the reverse engineering that we have in Islamic banking, okay? Continuous reverse engineering. I'm sorry to pick up, I'm in Malaysia, I have to be careful, but this whole organized tawarruk story, for instance, okay? This is particular Malaysian narrative now. And when we look at Islamic Fiqh Academy, tells you that, no, it is haram, you cannot do organized tawarruk. But then you say that we have to expand Islamic banking, the market pushes us, so we have to provide organized tawarruk. The last data, Bank Negara provided disaggregated data, and after that they stopped 2019. 2019 shows that from 2016, the share of organized tawarruk in Islamic financing was, Islamic banking financing was around, if I'm not mistaken, 26%, but in 2019 it increased to 46%. And now, after 4 years, I'm sure that even further. So the institutional logic forces you to use the reverse engineering to bring something that you were told that it is haram, you cannot use it, but because the market pushes you. Now, exceptions, and this is particularly important innovation, because in creating innovations, you do a lot of exceptions. The norms are created by exceptions, but who has the hegemony to create exceptions from norm? Okay,
who has the power?
Yep, hegemon will do that. In our case, in the constrained world, Islam will tell us that therefore Allah is hegemon. But when you have market pushing you to bring that into the realm, market is hegemon as opposed to Allah. Okay, so these are therefore, innovation is an amazing story, but again it goes back to the earlier question. Our objective function has to be set. And we have to work towards that objective function rather than instrumentalizing our ethicality to produce such outcomes. I'll stop there.
Yeah, so by removing the constraint at the beginning and then later imposing it, it creates unbalanced,
certainly.
lopsided
eclecticism.
Yeah.
It is total eclecticism, and you do not have the integrity. So it is no longer an integral emergence. But even not emergent pattern, it is not integral in itself, it is inconsistent. So contemplation and action, the difficulty between the two, then it becomes inconsistent. And therefore, for instance, in our Islamic finance programs, you would have Muamalat, Islamic banking, risk management, and all that. But then you wouldn't have organizational behavior. You wouldn't have Islamic management. But it's a bank, it's an institution. It manages monies, it manages people. You see how we become very choosy. When it comes to transferring money, we talk about Sharia compliance, structures, but when it comes to banks, our Islamic banks, managing people, managing resources, somehow we never think that there is this aspect as well. That has to be Islamic as well. So our institutions becomes terribly hybrid as well. One part operating so-called Islamically, again we have problem there, but at least there's a Sharia compliance, there's a Sharia board, but then the other parts as usual every day. So these are important. Therefore, institutional innovations and structures are essential for us to come up with, in addition to the product innovation.
And you just have highlighted actually, the merit of our program in the Faculty of Economics and Muamalat, where we stress on the muamalat on administrative aspects of it, including the increase of the competency of the people.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, not only in Islamic banking and finance.
Prof. Zurina, I want to comment on Prof. Mehmet when he said about tawarruk, organized tawarruk. I think because we are talking about the emergent issues that can be researched or explored, I think most of us aware that we now Bank Negara already want to try to shift from tawarruk into other alternative. But the issue now, we don't find a good alternative to replace organized tawarruk. So this is the opportunity for our young researcher. If you can produce or suggest alternative for this organized tawarruk, then and the suggestion must be very practical, and the market can see that this is a very good alternative, then I think we can be a very successful researcher. Try to produce something that is practical and doable for the industry.
To revert back to the authentic Islamic economics and finance. So I think that's the time that we have. I would like to thank Prof. Mehmet Asutay.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, and Prof. Amir for the insights and also questions, participation from the audience. So I think with this, I'll end the session with Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.